Hi guys, this is the Q&A video for short stories. Several of you sent me some really great questions, and in fact quite a few of you had the same questions, so I sort of narrowed it down to 5 categories. To start off with, I'd like to give you some advice on titles. The question was asked, how do you write a good title without making it too cheesy? Really, the thing about titles is you want to make sure that it's something interesting to draw the reader to your story, but not something so vague or not about the story that it doesn't fit. So, in my opinion, really you should go with the title that's simpler, that matches the story a little bit better. For me personally, when I'm writing stories, I try to look through my story and see if there's anything eye-catching, any phrase that I came up with that sounds kind of cool, and use that as the title. Sometimes I've even come up with the title first, so before I wrote the story itself. So it kind of depends. Typically, though, you have to write the entire story before you have a good sense of what the title should be. Another question was how to start a short story. The starting short stories can be very, very difficult. Really, it's a lot of times you end up with a really bad beginning. So keep in mind that you might have to be a little bit flexible with the beginning. For me, when I'm writing, I've found that usually the first couple of paragraphs I end up deleting anyway, but you have to start somewhere. So go ahead and just start writing with where you're comfortable in the story and just keep writing, and then kind of go back and reevaluate, do you need that stuff in the beginning, because you might not. A lot of times what happens is there's a lot more telling than showing in the beginning, and so it can be deleted and backstory can be filled in later on. Another question was really about the process for creating a short story, how to go about starting and continuing. There is a PowerPoint video in the module, in Module 2, that might help you out with this, but really every writer is going to be a little bit different. For me, personally, I don't do a whole lot of outlining. I really don't do a whole lot of characters. If I'm writing a novel, I might make a list of characters and places because I tend to forget people pretty quickly, so I usually keep a list with me, but in general I just start writing and I just keep writing and writing, and usually what comes out first is pretty bad, and then I go back and I revise. Now, some people outlining works really well. Using like a plot line might help you, where you kind of get a general sense of what you'll start with, what the rising action will be, and how each conflict links to the next conflict and that sort of thing. I really like character questionnaires for developing your character. I've done some for my own characters, and it helps to really develop them. Really, the advice is you should know your characters better than the reader does. That is, not everything you come up with for the character will end up in the story, but you should really have a good sense of who they are. And you can really tell when an author doesn't have a good sense of who their character is. It makes for a poor story. You see this a lot in movies. Another question was about creating realistic dialogue. That is, how do you write dialogue that sounds like something that people would actually say? Dialogue, for me personally, is pretty difficult. I kind of struggle with writing it in a natural way. Part of what you really need to do is just listen to people talking. That's kind of creepy, but listen to people having conversations around you. Watch movies and get a good sense of dialogue, especially if you watch a good movie. There are a lot of really great examples of movies that have excellent dialogue. They're very witty, they're very interesting, and each character is fully developed with the way they speak as well. Now, you don't necessarily have to include dialogue in your story either, so it might be something you decide to cut out. The big thing to remember is you should never have a useless line of dialogue. That is, every line of dialogue in your story needs to be there for a reason. And if you just include like a casual phone conversation, a lot of people start out with, hey, how are you? I'm fine, how are you? That sort of thing needs to be eliminated because we don't want to read that. That's boring. So you want to make sure that your dialogue is furthering the story. And don't use dialogue to explain backstory either. That can be, it's often a pitfall that students fall into. It's called as you know Bob dialogue. As you know Bob, we're in this situation because of blah. And it really isn't that interesting for the reader. Another thing about dialogue is you really shouldn't start your story with a line of dialogue. The problem with doing that is that line of dialogue will get lost because the reader has no context to stick it in. Another question was asked, how to maintain energy, particularly for the energy short story that you're writing right now. That is, how do you continue to maintain energy throughout the story? And how do you do so in a quick way, rather than writing out the entire thing and then going back and rewriting the entire thing and so on and so forth. Really, it has to do with as you're writing, whether or not you're actually reading what you write. I typically will write, just a short section of my story and then go back and try and revise it. Sometimes I'll do like a quick first draft where I just get my thoughts out and then try and go back, and really it's a matter of just shortening spaces that need to be shortened. That is, sections that really don't do a whole lot. I see this a lot in student writing where it's just kind of a list of, especially if it's first person narration, it's a list of things they did. I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and it's really boring, and there's not a whole lot of action there. So you want to make sure that this section is interesting and engaging for your reader. So it's important to work on energy right there and really amp up what happens and what information we get at what time. So sometimes it's also adding in more feelings and emotions from the character, particularly if it's a first-person point of view. We need to feel what the character is feeling. We need to feel it in an unusual way, though, because as human beings, we experience the same sort of feelings. We understand them, but we may not be able to classify or characterize our own feelings. So you being able to do that for a character will help a reader understand himself or herself a little bit better, and that's a great feeling as a writer. So that's pretty much all of the major questions that were asked. Some of them were sort of sub-questions of that. Hopefully this gives you some ideas for your stories, and if you have any other questions at all, certainly send me an email. I can write you a response. I can do another video like this if I need to, but definitely we're getting to the end of the short story unit, so really be working on those stories, getting them done. And like I said, if you need anything, just contact me and I'll be happy to help.